On the early hours of Christmas Day 2017, the usually tranquil streets of Egu in La Union, Philippines, were transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. Families had risen before dawn, eager to attend the Christmas morning Mass at the famous Our Lady of Manawag Church, carrying gifts, prayers, and hopes for a joyful day. Among them was a small jeepney, packed with pilgrims, young and old alike, their hearts light with the festive spirit. But fate, cruel and sudden, had other plans. As the jeepney swerved out of its lane in an attempt to overtake a larger bus, metal met metal with a deafening crash. In the blink of an eye, 20 lives were extinguished among them, a 5-month-old infant, a 7-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old girl. Entire branches of one extended family were wiped out, leaving a void that could never be filled, their Christmas morning stolen in a heartbeat. The aftermath was chaotic and haunting. The jeepney lay mangled and unrecognizable, its engine torn free, twisted into the surrounding wreckage. The bus, though larger, bore its own scars of the violent impact, with passengers sustaining injuries ranging from cuts and bruises to life-altering trauma. Emergency responders worked frantically in the freezing pre-dawn air, pulling survivors from the wreckage, their hands bloodied, their faces etched with shock and grief. Chief Inspector Roy Villanueva delivered the grim confirmation. The jeepney's driver and 19 passengers were dead on arrival. Across the Philippines, the news rippled through communities like a shockwave, reminding everyone that even the most sacred and peaceful moments of the holiday season could be shattered in an instant. This tragedy was part of a broader pattern of misfortune that had plagued the nation in the days leading up to Christmas 2017. Just hours before, a fire erupted in a shopping mall in Davao, claiming at least 37 lives, while tropical storms wreaked havoc across several provinces, flooding villages and drowning more than 200 people. The Philippines, a nation where Christmas is deeply revered and widely celebrated, saw its collective joy replaced by sorrow as countless families grappled with loss, fear, and uncertainty. For the victims in Egu, a morning that should have been filled with light, laughter, and devotion became a nightmare of shattered metal, piercing screams, and a grief that would linger far beyond the holiday. The Egu collision is a stark reminder of how fragile life can be, especially during a time of year when roads are overcrowded and vigilance often slips. What was meant to be a journey of faith, love, and celebration became a scene of sudden tragedy, a cruel twist that left survivors and witnesses forever scarred. A simple jeepney, once a vessel of hope and connection, became an instrument of death in a moment, leaving families to confront the unbearable reality of loss and the cold, hard truth of life's unpredictability. In the Philippines, where Christmas is a sacred time of unity and joy, this day will forever be remembered not for its celebrations, but for the fragility of life, the suddenness of tragedy, and the profound heartbreak that can arrive when it is least expected. The echoes of that day continue to resonate through memorials, news reports, and the lingering grief of those who survived and those who lost loved ones. In the quiet, affluent suburb of Friendswood, Texas, Dr. Clara Harris seemed to have it all. A respected dentist born in Colombia, she had built a successful life with her husband, orthodontist Dr. David Lynn Harris, raising twin sons and David's teenage daughter from a previous marriage. On the surface, their lives were the picture of stability and comfort, a family admired in their community. But beneath that facade, their marriage was fraying, torn apart by suspicion, betrayal, and mounting obsession. By mid-2002, Clara's doubts about David's fidelity had evolved into an all-consuming fixation. What began as uncertainty became a relentless, burning anger. On the night of July 24, 2002, that anger exploded in a way no one could have anticipated. After uncovering David's affair with his receptionist, Gail Bridges, Clara acted with meticulous determination, following the trail laid out by the private investigator she had hired to watch him. She drove to the Nassau Bay Hilton, the very hotel where she and David had been married a decade earlier, her heart racing, mind consumed with rage. Inside the lobby, witnesses saw Clara confront Bridges, striking her in a fit of fury before hotel staff intervened and escorted her outside. But the confrontation did not end there. Moments later, as David and Bridges exited the building, Clara accelerated her silver Mercedes-Benz across the parking lot. The first impact sent David flying roughly 25 feet. Prosecutors later revealed that Clara circled the lot, crossed two grassy medians, and ran over him again, deliberately, stopping the car on top of his body. Her 16-year-old stepdaughter, Lindsay, sat in the passenger seat, screaming for her to stop, powerless as the violence unfolded before her eyes. The entire incident was captured on videotape by the very investigators Clara had hired, footage that would become a central piece of the prosecution's case. David was pronounced dead at the scene, and Clara was arrested shortly afterward. The nation was stunned. A woman, once celebrated for her professionalism and motherhood, had transformed in a matter of minutes into the perpetrator of one of the most shocking acts of marital revenge in Texas history. At trial, prosecutors painted a portrait of deliberate malice, emphasizing Clara's recorded admission that she wanted to hurt her husband. The defense argued that the killing was accidental, the product of sudden passion, claiming the car could not have been maneuvered to strike him multiple times. But witnesses, including Lindsay, testified that Clara had run over David 3 separate times, and portions of the video, combined with her police interview, revealed her rage and lack of remorse. On February 14, 2003, the day that would have marked their 11th wedding anniversary, Clara was convicted of murder under the sudden passion clause and sentenced to 20 years in prison and a $1,000 fine. During her incarceration at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, she reportedly spent her time transcribing school textbooks into Braille. Her twin sons were raised by family friends, while her stepdaughter and David's parents filed wrongful death lawsuits, resulting in multi-million-dollar settlements. After serving 15 years, Clara was granted parole in 2017 and walked free on May 11, 2018, completing parole supervision in February 2023. She emerged subdued, yet smiling, stepping back into the world after committing one of the most infamous revenge killings in modern American history. The case left an indelible mark on public consciousness, a chilling testament to how betrayal, obsession, and unchecked rage can transform even the most familiar lives into scenes of unspeakable violence. The story of Brandon Lee's death on the set of The Crow remains one of Hollywood's most unsettling reminders of how routine decisions can lead to irreversible consequences when safety is not given the respect it deserves. In 1993, Lee was poised for a major breakthrough, stepping confidently into his first leading role and carrying the momentum of a career that was beginning to take shape. As the son of Bruce Lee, he was no stranger to public attention, yet he was determined to establish himself through his own talent and dedication. The production of The Crow was built around a dark and atmospheric world, full of rain-soaked streets, emotionally driven action, and themes of love, loss, and justice. These themes later took on an unintended and haunting significance after the events of March 31st. During what should have been a carefully controlled scene, a prop firearm that was intended to fire blanks instead discharged a real projectile. The cause was a sequence of preventable errors involving improperly made dummy rounds that had been used earlier for close-up shots. These rounds still contained active primers, which generated enough force during a test to dislodge a bullet into the barrel. When blanks were loaded later that day, the gas pressure from the blank propelled the lodged bullet forward with lethal force, striking Lee in the abdomen. Despite immediate medical attention and lengthy emergency surgery, Lee died that evening at the age of 28. The tragedy was not only devastating, but deeply frustrating because so many of the contributing factors were tied to rushed decisions, budget concerns, and a production culture that had grown accustomed to bending safety guidelines. The crew had been working long hours under intense pressure, and several experienced weapons specialists had either been replaced or were not present when they were needed most. The investigation that followed forced the film industry to confront a wide range of systemic safety issues. Firearms had often been handled casually or entrusted to individuals without the necessary training. The incident exposed how fatigue, miscommunication, and cost-cutting measures can combine into a silent threat long before anyone realizes the danger. As a result, the industry began adopting stricter procedures for handling weapons on set, including better oversight, clearer chains of responsibility, and more rigorous standards for prop preparation and storage. Although the lessons were clear, later incidents have shown that the battle for consistent and reliable safety practices is ongoing. Beyond technical explanations and official reports, the human impact of Lee's death remains the most powerful element of the story. Friends, family, and colleagues remembered him as warm, focused, and generous, with a sense of excitement about his future that made his loss feel especially profound. His fiancée, Eliza Hutton, his mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, and the cast and crew lived with a grief that no investigation could fully resolve. When The Crow was eventually released, it became an unintentional tribute to Lee's talent, and audiences who watch it today often feel a mixture of admiration and sadness. His performance carries both the promise of a rising career and the weight of a life cut short. The tragedy continues to stand as a solemn reminder that the people who bring stories to life on screen deserve unwavering protection, and that even small oversights can have consequences that last for generations. On the morning of December 24, 1932, the town of Mouakwa, Illinois, stirred awake to the familiar chill of winter. Streets dusted lightly with frost and chimneys sending up lazy curls of smoke. Children were excited, homes were decorated, and the scent of pine mingled with the aroma of breakfast. It was a town preparing for a peaceful Christmas Eve, unaware that the festive air would soon be pierced by horror. Deep beneath the surface, in the twisting dark corridors of the Mouakwa coal mine, life continued as usual for the miners who braved the darkness to provide warmth and livelihoods for their families. But on that fateful morning, the routine would be shattered in an instant. As the day shift began, a tiny spark, the open flame of a miner's carbide lamp, met with deadly methane gas that had quietly built up in the mine. The result was catastrophic. A deafening explosion tore through the shaft, collapsing walls, twisting timber supports, and sending smoke and dust shooting upward. 54 miners were killed instantly, their lives extinguished before many even had the chance to celebrate the holiday with their loved ones. Only 2 men, trapped in a deeper cage, narrowly escaped death, their survival a grim exception to the overwhelming loss. Families who had waved goodbye to their fathers, brothers, and sons that morning would never see them again. The joyous anticipation of Christmas was replaced with terror and disbelief as the quiet town struggled to comprehend the scale of the disaster. Word of the explosion spread like wildfire. Soon, townspeople congregated outside the mine, faces etched with fear and helplessness, listening anxiously for any sign of life. Rescue miners arrived from nearby towns, battling darkness, choking dust, and unstable structures as they searched for survivors and recovered the bodies of the trapped men. The work was grueling, relentless, and dangerous, stretching over 6 excruciating days. Illinois Central Railroad provided shelter for the rescuers, and the American Red Cross, along with local volunteers, ensured food and warmth for those risking their lives in the mine. The town held its collective breath, mourning in private and in public, as the horrifying truth slowly sank in. Dozens of men would never come home. The disaster left scars that would linger for generations. The mine's owner promised stricter safety measures, and electric lamps replaced open flames, but the tragedy had already carved itself into the town's history. In the years that followed, the mine reopened briefly, only to shutter permanently by 1935 as the shafts collapsed and the structures crumbled, leaving the echo of whistling winds to haunt the empty corridors. Families carried memories of the lost men through every Christmas thereafter, their absence a silent testament to the fragile line between life and death. Decades later, the Mouakwa Coal Mine Museum opened in 1986, a somber monument to the miners who had perished. The museum carefully preserved tools, photographs, and stories, keeping alive the memory of the lives lost and the perilous work of coal mining in the early 20th century. In 2008, a documentary funded by the Illinois State Library further chronicled the disaster, bringing the chilling events of that Christmas morning to life once more for new generations. The Moika coal mine disaster stands as a haunting reminder that even during the season of joy, tragedy can strike without warning, transforming celebration into unspeakable sorrow and forever altering the lives of a small town that once expected nothing more than a peaceful holiday. On May 23, 2014, a quiet coastal town near the University of California, Santa Barbara, was ripped apart by one of the most horrifying acts of revenge in modern memory. Isla Vista, usually filled with the laughter of students and the casual hum of late classes, became the stage for a meticulously planned massacre. The orchestrator was 22-year-old Elliot Rodger, the son of a Hollywood filmmaker who had grown up in privilege yet carried a festering hatred beneath the surface. Rodger's resentment toward women had been building for years, fueled by rejection, envy, and a sense of entitlement. Diagnosed in childhood with developmental disorders, he had struggled to connect with people, and his isolation only deepened his anger. Over time, he became obsessed with his own perceived injustices, venting in online forums filled with misogynistic ideology and chronicling his rage in journals and videos. These dark writings culminated in a manifesto, My Twisted World, in which he openly plotted a day of retribution against a world he believed had wronged him. In the months leading up to the massacre, Rodger carefully prepared. Between 2012 and 2014, he legally purchased 3 semi-automatic pistols and ammunition, honed his aim at gun ranges, and practiced stabbing motions on pillows and bed sheets. Disturbing videos he uploaded to YouTube caught the attention of a mental health worker, but nothing stopped him. His parents, unaware of the scale of his plans, would later learn the devastating truth too late. That evening, Rodger struck inside his Isla Vista apartment. Armed with 2 hunting knives, he ambushed his roommates, Weihan David Wong and Chongyuan James Hong, killing them with brutal precision. George Chen, a friend visiting the apartment, was stabbed 94 times in a frenzy of violence. After the attacks, Rodger calmly cleaned himself, wrote a final journal entry, and uploaded a chilling video to YouTube, announcing his hatred toward the world and his plan to punish women for rejecting him and men for living lives he envied. Then he drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house, a target chosen because he deemed its residents the most beautiful women on campus. Locked out and frustrated, he opened fire on 3 women walking nearby. 2, Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss, were killed despite desperate efforts to save them. A 3rd survived, but with life-changing injuries. He continued his rampage, shooting through the windows of a deli and killing Christopher Michaels Martinez, a 20-year-old student, before barreling through the streets, striking pedestrians and exchanging gunfire with police. The terror lasted barely 10 minutes, leaving 6 dead and 14 injured. Rodger ended his life after crashing his vehicle, leaving a town reeling and a community forever scarred. The aftermath was devastating. Families sued local authorities and property managers, claiming clear warning signs were ignored. Rodger's writings became a disturbing inspiration for extremist incel communities, alarming law enforcement and researchers. In response, California passed the nation's first red flag law, allowing authorities to remove firearms from individuals deemed dangerous. More than a decade later, the Isla Vista massacre remains one of the most chilling, revenge-driven killings ever recorded, a haunting reminder of how entitlement, hatred, and inaction can converge into unimaginable tragedy. The 2013 sinkhole tragedy in Seffner, Florida, remains one of those unsettling events that forces people to think about how unpredictable the natural world can be, especially in places where the ground beneath our feet isn't as solid as we assume. When a sinkhole suddenly opened beneath the bedroom of 37-year-old Jeffrey Bush, the story immediately gripped national attention not because it was sensational, but because it felt almost unreal. A reminder that even in a normal suburban home, something extraordinary and catastrophic can happen in an instant. That night, the earth simply gave way without warning, swallowing an entire room and leaving his family in shock, as they tried desperately to reach him. First responders arrived quickly, but even the professionals had to confront the frightening reality that the ground around the sinkhole was still actively shifting, unstable, and dangerous. The cavity beneath the house turned out to be enormous, deeper and wider than initially believed, and rescuers had to make the heartbreaking decision to pull back, not because they wanted to, but because the soil kept collapsing, and entering the hole would have put more lives at risk. The home was condemned almost immediately and eventually demolished, with the sinkhole later examined, stabilized, filled, and monitored for years. What made the event resonate so strongly across the country was that there had been no real warning signs, no cracks in the wall, no sagging floors, no strange noises, nothing that would have signaled the house sat above a hidden void carved slowly over time by Florida's porous limestone foundations. This is part of what makes Florida especially prone to sinkholes, its karst landscape, built on rock that dissolves as groundwater moves through it, can develop massive underground cavities that remain invisible until they suddenly collapse. The idea that such a void could silently form and then open without notice, especially in the middle of the night, was both a scientific point of interest and a human tragedy. Over time, the site became a sort of somber landmark, not in a sensational way, but as a place that reminded locals and experts just how complex and vulnerable the state's geology really is. Years later, the sinkhole reopened briefly, thankfully, without harming anyone, but it underscored that these events are not one-time anomalies. They're part of Florida's natural processes, rare but entirely possible. For geologists, the incident prompted conversations about better monitoring, improved surveying, and public awareness about the warning signs of sinkhole activity, though even experts acknowledge that some sinkholes, especially those that open suddenly, remain nearly impossible to predict with current technology. For the family and community, the event was a profound loss, something that couldn't be explained away by science alone. It illustrated how a geological event becomes a human story about fragility, unpredictability, and the limits of control. While the incident is sometimes referenced today in documentaries or news summaries as an example of nature's startling power, it's remembered most as a deeply tragic moment for a family who did nothing wrong, experienced no warnings, and suffered consequences that were as sudden as they were devastating. Ultimately, the Seffner sinkhole stands as one of those rare events where science, nature, and human life intersect in a way that leaves a lasting impact, prompting not just curiosity about how such things happen, but empathy for those whose lives were forever changed in the few seconds it took for the earth to open beneath a quiet Florida home. On Christmas Eve, 1953, the quiet stillness of the Czechoslovakian town of Šakvis was shattered in a moment that would haunt generations. A local train stood waiting at the station, passengers anticipating the usual holiday travels, when without warning, an express train barreled into it at full speed. The impact was catastrophic, tearing carriages apart and killing over 100 people instantly, while dozens more were left injured. It was later revealed that the crew of the express train had been drinking, their negligence turning a routine journey into one of the deadliest rail disasters in the nation's history. The tragedy, largely silenced by the strict communist regime of the time, became a grim reminder of how human error and recklessness can transform a season of celebration into horror. Halfway across the world, on the same Christmas Eve, New Zealand faced a disaster of natural fury. The Wellington-Auckland Night Express, filled with families and friends eager to celebrate Christmas together, approached the Wangehu River near Tangawai. Unknown to the passengers, Mount Ruapahu's crater lake had unleashed a massive lahar, a torrent of water, mud, and volcanic debris rushing down the river just minutes before the train's arrival. Despite desperate attempts by the engine driver and fireman to brake and control the train, it hurtled into the weakened bridge. The first 5 carriages plunged into the icy, raging river, the force of the current tearing them apart. The leading first-class carriage toppled seconds later, while survivors clung desperately to life in the chaos. Of 285 passengers aboard, 151 perished, many of them families bound for holiday gatherings, their dreams of Christmas joy swept away in a violent, sulfur-scented flood. Among the victims were 3 young men from Palmerston North: Richard Ted Brett, 18, his friend John Cockburn, 17, and John's younger brother Douglas, 12. Ted, an aspiring photographer, had hoped to capture images of the volcano during the journey, unaware that he would witness a scene of unimaginable terror instead. While Ted survived, swept to a sheltered part of the river, John and Douglas lost their lives, and John's body was never recovered. The bravery of the crew and nearby rescuers saved countless others. Charles Parker and Lance Redman remained at the controls as the train plunged, their quick thinking preventing further carnage, while Guard William Inglis and civilians like Cyril Ellis pulled passengers from the teetering wreckage. Recognition for their heroism came decades later, a small consolation against the overwhelming loss endured that night. The Shakvitz and Tangiwai disasters stand as grim monuments to the fragility of life during the holiday season. One was caused by human negligence, the other by the relentless force of nature. Yet both share a chilling truth. Joy can vanish in an instant, replaced by fear, grief, and a haunting emptiness. Families who set out to celebrate found themselves confronting the unimaginable, a reminder that even on the most festive nights, tragedy can strike without warning, leaving stories of survival and loss that echo through the years. Amy Bishop had long been recognized for her intelligence and ambition, a Harvard-trained geneticist and assistant professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. By 2010, however, the brilliance that had earned her academic respect was shadowed by growing tension and instability. Colleagues described her as unpredictable, abrasive, and at times deeply unsettling, a woman whose sharp mind was matched by an equally sharp resentment toward anyone she believed had wronged her. At 44, married and the mother of 4, Bishop faced the loss of her academic career after being denied tenure in March 2009. Appeals had failed, leaving her position and her professional identity on the line. Those around her noticed a dangerous shift. She became increasingly fixated on perceived slights, professional obstacles, and the idea that her brilliance had been unjustly overlooked. The stage was set for an act that would shock her colleagues and the academic world alike. On February 12, 2010, Bishop attended a routine biology department faculty meeting in the Shelby Center for Science and Technology. About 12 colleagues were present. For the first 30 or 40 minutes, she appeared calm, almost ordinary, until the moment shattered everything. Without warning, she drew a Ruger P95 9mm handgun and began firing methodically at those closest to her. 3 faculty members, Dr. Gopi Podila, Dr. Maria Ragland Davis, and Dr. Adriel Johnson, were killed instantly. 3 others, including Dr. Joseph Lay, Assistant Professor Luis Cruz Vera, and staff aide Stephanie Montecchiolo, sustained serious injuries. Survivors later described the attack as execution style, noting how Bishop targeted her victims deliberately, rather than shooting at random. Deborah Morariti, a biochemistry professor, narrowly avoided becoming a 7th victim. When Bishop's handgun jammed, Morariti lunged, grabbing at her legs and helping others push Bishop from the room and block the door. Bishop was apprehended shortly afterward outside the building, reportedly in denial, insisting her colleagues were still alive. The shooting was not an isolated act of violence. Bishop's past revealed a disturbing pattern of aggression and erratic behavior. In 1986, she had fatally shot her 18-year-old brother Seth in Massachusetts, a death initially ruled accidental, though later scrutiny suggested probable cause for criminal charges. In 1993, she and her husband had been questioned in connection with a pipe bomb incident targeting a former supervisor and additional confrontations, including a 2002 altercation at a restaurant, reflected her long-standing difficulty managing anger. Within UAH, Bishop had developed a reputation for unsettling classroom behavior, alienating students, dismissing graduate researchers from her lab, and generating multiple complaints over her teaching style. Though her academic accomplishments were notable, interpersonal conflicts and disputes over tenure had left her increasingly isolated, frustrated, and bitter. The aftermath of the Huntsville shootings was devastating. Bishop faced charges of capital murder and attempted murder. In September 2012, she pleaded guilty, avoiding the death penalty. and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Survivors, including Joseph Lay, bore lifelong physical and psychological scars, Lay suffering traumatic brain injury and partial blindness. In response, UAH implemented sweeping campus safety reforms, including mandatory background checks for faculty, emergency alert systems, and the creation of a behavioral evaluation and threat assessment team to monitor staff exhibiting concerning behaviors. Memorial services honored Podila, Davis, and Johnson, drawing thousands who mourned the loss of brilliant lives cut short. Bishop's actions reopened scrutiny of her past, including her brother's death, illustrating the devastating consequences of unresolved psychological instability compounded by resentment and access to firearms. Across academia, the tragedy of February 12, 2010, remains one of the most horrific revenge-driven killings in recent history, a stark reminder of how personal grievances and professional disputes, when left unchecked, can erupt into unimaginable violence. At the Pangyo Techno Valley Festival in 2014, the day began with an atmosphere of uncomplicated excitement as students, office workers, and fans gathered for a free outdoor concert that promised a pleasant break from routine. The performance area was lively, the weather was cooperative, and the energy of the crowd rose steadily as more people arrived to watch their favorite artists. In the middle of this cheerful scene stood a large metal ventilation grate that seemed like a harmless part of the urban setting and an appealing spot for anyone hoping to improve their view. People stepped onto it naturally, unaware that it concealed a deep drop into an underground parking facility. No visible signs warned them away, and no staff members considered the possibility that the grate might not support the growing cluster of spectators. The crowd laughed, talked, and angled their phones to capture the stage while the grate silently endured a weight it was never engineered to withstand. When it finally gave way, it did so without hesitation, sending those standing on it plunging downward and freezing the rest of the audience in shock as the music halted and the festival instantly shifted from celebration to catastrophe. Emergency responders rushed to the scene with urgency as the magnitude of the event became clear to everyone present. The ventilation shaft was narrow and deep, making rescue efforts extremely challenging, and the people who had fallen were gravely injured by the impact as well as by the debris that followed them down. Bystanders attempted to help however they could, calling for assistance and trying to keep the area clear, while officials worked quickly to assess the situation. News outlets were alerted almost immediately, and within minutes the tragedy became a national shock, prompting difficult conversations about event safety and the responsibilities of organizers. Investigators soon discovered that the grate, though solid in appearance, had been designed only to support its own frame and occasional maintenance access, rather than the combined weight of dozens of spectators. The realization that such an avoidable weakness had been overlooked created a wave of public anger, particularly among families of the victims who were left grieving losses that felt painfully senseless. As details emerged, the focus shifted to the chain of decisions that allowed the hazard to remain unnoticed, including assumptions made during planning and the absence of clearly defined safety protocols for crowd control in a busy and dynamic setting. Over time, the memory of the incident has continued to influence how public events are organized throughout South Korea, serving as a lasting reminder of the importance of vigilance in situations where large groups gather with an expectation of safety. Authorities introduced stricter guidelines for inspections and required organizers to demonstrate a stronger understanding of the structural features of their venues, even those that might seem insignificant at first glance. The event soon entered national conversations about responsibility and smarter management of crowded public spaces across communities. The incident also encouraged more open communication between organizers and municipal agencies so that potential risks could be identified earlier and corrected before crowds arrived. For many people, the tragedy is remembered not only for its immediate impact, but also for the sense of collective responsibility it inspired in the years that followed. It stands as a powerful illustration of how everyday infrastructure can become dangerous when assumptions replace careful evaluation, and how communities can learn and adapt when confronted with evidence that established habits and norms need improvement. The story of Pangyo remains a sobering testament to the value of preparation and the ongoing effort to protect lives. On Christmas Day 2024, what was meant to be a joyful holiday turned into an unimaginable nightmare for a family from Massachusetts. Matthew Goldstein, 52, an inspiring elementary school teacher known for his dedication and warmth. His wife Lila, 54, a talented and driven project manager at Microsoft, and their daughters, Valerie, 22, and Violet, 19, were spending the holidays at their lake house in Wakefield, New Hampshire, a place they had chosen for peace, relaxation, and family time. But overnight, a silent and invisible killer crept into their home. A malfunction in the propane heating system allowed deadly carbon monoxide to slowly seep into the house, a colorless and odorless gas that left no warning, no sound, no chance to escape. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the entire family had been claimed, their lives extinguished in the quiet hours before dawn. The horror unfolded unnoticed, hidden behind the cheerful holiday decorations and the serene winter landscape. Neighbors, passing by the lake house, saw nothing amiss. The world outside remained calm and peaceful, entirely unaware of the tragedy inside. Relatives, expecting the family at an extended Christmas gathering, grew increasingly anxious when calls and messages went unanswered. By late afternoon, at around 4:20 p.m., police were dispatched to check on the family, arriving to a scene that would haunt anyone who witnessed it. 3 family members were discovered in their bedrooms, the 4th in a bathroom, and authorities believe they died silently during the night, their final moments spent unaware of the lethal gas filling their home. Fire crews confirmed elevated levels of carbon monoxide throughout the house, revealing the cruel, unseen force that had turned a warm, festive holiday into a scene of unimaginable grief. Matthew Goldstein had dedicated his life to education, shaping the minds of 8th graders at the Edith C. Baker School near Boston, while Lila Goldstein had spent decades excelling in her career, managing complex projects that often revolved around cutting-edge technology and artificial intelligence at Microsoft. Their daughters were just beginning to carve out their futures. Valerie, as a passionate teacher committed to shaping young lives, Violet, pursuing her dreams at the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design. The loss of the Goldstein family sent shockwaves through multiple communities. Students, colleagues, friends, neighbors, and extended family were left grappling with grief, disbelief, and the haunting question of how such a vibrant family could be gone in an instant. New Hampshire Fire Marshal Sean Toomey spoke about the tragedy with a sense of urgency, emphasizing that carbon monoxide, a silent killer, could strike anyone at any time, and often with devastating consequences. He highlighted the absence of carbon monoxide alarms in the lake house, a stark reminder of the importance of these life-saving devices, especially in homes relying on propane, oil, or wood-burning heating systems. Each year, hundreds of Americans die silently from unintentional carbon monoxide poisoning, with thousands more hospitalized. Yet the danger remains invisible and underestimated, a deadly presence lurking in what should be the safest place on Earth, home. That Christmas, temperatures in Wakefield plunged to -11 degrees Celsius, the icy cold outside a cruel contrast to the warmth inside the Goldstein home, a warmth that tragically could not protect them. Their dream holiday by the lake, meant for laughter, connection, and festive cheer, became a chilling lesson in the fragility of life. The quiet suburban streets of Markham, Ontario seemed peaceful, but beneath the surface, dark currents ran through one family's life. Jennifer Pan, 24, the daughter of Vietnamese Chinese immigrants, had grown up under relentless pressure. Her parents, Beatrice and Bin Pan, had fled Vietnam as refugees and built a household of discipline and high expectations, demanding excellence in academics, music, and sports. Every move Jennifer made was scrutinized. Dating, parties, or rebellion were forbidden. Outwardly, she appeared perfectly polished, obedient, and beautiful, but behind closed doors, resentment festered, simmering like a storm waiting to break. Jennifer cultivated a secret life. She forged report cards, lied about attending university, and maintained a hidden relationship with her boyfriend, Daniel Wong. Over time, the web of deception grew darker, twisted by a desire for freedom and control. On the night of November 8, 2010, the Pan household erupted into terror. Jennifer, who had meticulously orchestrated every detail, unlocked the door to 3 armed men she had hired. They entered under the guise of a robbery, dragging her parents to the basement. Heads covered, her parents were shot repeatedly. Beatrice Pan was killed instantly, struck in the head. Ben survived, but was left permanently blind. Jennifer emerged, seemingly unharmed, claiming she had been tied up and forced to witness the attack, even dialing 911 as her father screamed from the basement. At first, police treated it as a random home invasion, puzzled by the untouched valuables and Jennifer's safety. But the truth was far more sinister. Investigators uncovered the meticulous planning behind the massacre. Jennifer had orchestrated the attack to seize control of her parents' finances and escape the strict confines of her upbringing. Her boyfriend, Daniel Wong, along with Lenford Crawford, David Milvaganam, and Eric Carty, played roles in arranging the deadly plot, though who fired the fatal shots remains unknown. Text messages exchanged in the hours leading up to the attack, along with her father's testimony, revealed the manipulation and calculated deceit behind every move. Ben, recovering from a coma, recalled seeing Jennifer speaking casually with one of the intruders, an image that shattered her story of fear and helplessness. The evidence painted a chilling portrait: years of resentment, a desire for autonomy twisted into lethal vengeance, and financial greed that made murder seem like a solution. The legal fallout was complex and drawn out. Jennifer and her co-conspirators were convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy, receiving life sentences with parole eligibility after 25 years. Eric Carty later died in prison, while appeals stretched over a decade, culminating in 2025 when the Supreme Court of Canada upheld much of the case but ordered retrials on some charges. Through it all, the consequences were devastating. Beatrice Pan was laid to rest in November 2010, while Ben's injuries barred him from attending her funeral. Felix Pan, Jennifer's younger brother, severed all contact with her, obtaining a restraining order. The story of Jennifer Pan remains one of Canada's most disturbing revenge killings, a stark reminder of how deception, resentment, and obsession can erupt into unspeakable violence, even within the most intimate family bonds. In August 1986, the world witnessed one of the most unusual and quietly devastating natural disasters in modern history, when Lake Nyos, a seemingly peaceful crater lake tucked into the hills of northwestern Cameroon, suddenly released a massive cloud of carbon dioxide that swept silently across nearby villages and claimed more than 1,300 lives in a single night. What made this tragedy so chilling was not fire, explosions, or any dramatic spectacle. It was the total absence of warning. The lake appeared calm, the evening was ordinary, and people settled into their nightly routines unaware that enormous amounts of carbon dioxide had been dissolving into the deep, cold layers of water for years. This hidden buildup created a dangerous reservoir of gas that behaved like a tightly sealed bottle under pressure. Scientists believe that a natural disturbance, such as a landslide or a minor geological shift, caused the gas-saturated water from the depths to rush upward. As the water rose toward the surface where pressure was lower, the dissolved carbon dioxide escaped all at once in a violent but invisible burst known as a limnic eruption. The released gas did not drift harmlessly into the sky. Instead, it moved outward along the ground in a dense cloud. Because carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen, the gas flowed into valleys and villages with silent speed, displacing breathable air and suffocating everything in its path. People and animals collapsed instantly, many in their sleep and others while going about their usual routines. Survivors later described waking to scenes that were difficult to comprehend. Entire families remained motionless in their homes. Livestock lay scattered across fields. The air carried an eerie stillness that felt almost unreal, because there had been no sounds of panic or struggle. For many who lived through it, the mystery of the event deepened the emotional impact. They did not understand how the night had transformed into a landscape of stillness. Scientists arriving at the scene were stunned by the scale and unusual nature of the disaster. At the time, limnic eruptions were not well understood and were considered extremely rare. Lake Nyos quickly became a focus of international attention as researchers tried to understand what had happened and how to prevent a similar catastrophe. The tragedy also brought global awareness to the risks hidden within certain volcanic lakes, revealing a natural hazard that had previously received little study. In the years that followed, researchers and engineers worked to design solutions that would prevent another buildup of gas in the lake. Their efforts resulted in the installation of tall vertical pipes capable of pumping gas-rich water from the depths to the surface in a controlled manner. The system worked like a continuous release valve, gradually venting carbon dioxide in a predictable way. This project represented a significant step in disaster prevention and showed how scientific understanding could turn a mysterious tragedy into a manageable risk. Lake Nyos also inspired new research into other lakes with similar geological characteristics, including Lake Monoon, which had experienced a smaller but similar gas release 2 years earlier. Today, Lake Nyos stands as both a warning and a lesson. It is a reminder that even serene landscapes can conceal immense natural forces, and that attention to hidden environmental processes is essential for protecting communities. The event remains a profound example of how the planet can reveal unexpected dangers, and how human resilience and scientific progress work together to learn from the past and build a safer future. On the evening of December 24, 1913, the air in Calumet, Michigan, should have been filled with laughter, carols, and the warm glow of holiday cheer. Families of striking miners gathered at Italian Hall for a Christmas party, a rare reprieve from the bitter realities of the ongoing Copper Country strike. Over 400 people, men, women, and children, packed into the hall, seeking comfort and camaraderie during a strike that had dragged on for months, leaving families worried about wages, work, and the cold winter ahead. But that night, joy turned to horror in an instant. Somewhere near the front of the hall, a voice shouted the word, "Fire." Panic erupted immediately. There was no fire, no smoke, no warning beyond that single, terrifying word. Yet, in the crowded hall, fear spread like wildfire. People surged toward the narrow staircase that led to the exit, pressed against one another, scrambling for a way out. The scene descended into chaos as parents clutched children, and children were trampled beneath the frantic crowd. In the crush of bodies, 73 people, most of them children, were killed, their lives snuffed out in a matter of moments. The cause of the shout was never definitively determined, though suspicion lingered that it had been deliberate, an act meant to terrorize the striking miners and their families, possibly by someone aligned with mine management. The tragedy left an indelible mark on the community. Funerals were held for the victims, many carried by grieving parents and neighbors, while anger and suspicion brewed beneath the surface. Some believed the cry of "fire" had been an intentional act by an anti-union ally of the mine management, a cruel move to disrupt a peaceful gathering and punish those involved in the strike. Investigations followed, but answers were scarce. Witnesses, many of whom did not speak English, struggled to communicate what they had seen, and inquests failed to determine a clear cause of death. The haunting image of children crushed in the stampede became a symbol of the immense human cost of industrial conflict, a reminder that even in moments meant for celebration, danger can strike unexpectedly and mercilessly. In the aftermath, bitterness simmered against the Citizens Alliance, who opposed the union, as well as the mining company itself. Relief efforts became mired in conflict, with bereaved families refusing aid from those they believed were complicit in the tragedy. The hall itself stood for decades as a silent witness to the horror that had unfolded within its walls, eventually demolished in 1984, leaving only the archway as a memorial. Woody Guthrie would later immortalize the disaster in his haunting song, 1913 Massacre, capturing the heartbreak and outrage of that fateful night. The Italian Hall disaster remains one of the deadliest Christmas-time tragedies in U.S. history, a chilling testament to how quickly celebration can turn to catastrophe. In the press of bodies and the echo of a single shouted word, the warmth of holiday joy was replaced by fear, grief, and the stark reality that human life can be fragile, especially when panic takes hold in a crowd. Families seeking only a moment of respite found themselves at the mercy of chaos, and the tragedy has haunted the memories of the Copper Country ever since. A grim reminder that the holiday season, no matter how bright, can sometimes conceal unimaginable peril. In 2005, Ghazala Khan, an 18-year-old Danish woman of Pakistani descent, lived under the suffocating weight of her family's rigid expectations. Born in Denmark on October 29, 1986, she spent much of her formative years in Pakistan, helping care for her ailing grandfather while navigating the strict codes of a traditional Punjabi household. Quiet and introspective, Ghazala had always been torn between duty and desire, between the life her family demanded of her and the life she yearned to live. Her family, steeped in conservative values, expected obedience, and their watchful eyes left little room for personal freedom. Every choice, every action, was measured against the invisible bar of honor, obedience, and reputation. Amid these suffocating restrictions, a spark of hope appeared in the form of Imal Khan, an Afghan-born man living in Denmark. Over 3 years, their love blossomed in secrecy. They met discreetly in Copenhagen, exchanged furtive messages, and nurtured a bond that had to remain hidden from a family whose wrath Ghazala knew could be deadly. To her, Imal represented freedom, choice, and the life she had been denied. To her family, however, he was an affront to their culture, a challenge to the rules that governed every aspect of their lives. Her fears were tragically justified. In February 2005, when Ghazala confessed her feelings to her mother, she was met with brutal punishment. Both her mother and older brother, Akhtar Abbas, physically attacked her, leaving her bruised and shaken. The family, seeking to correct her defiance, isolated her from the outside world, cutting off the fragile connections that had given her hope. Yet, Ghazala refused to relinquish her desire for independence and love. On September 5, 2005, she fled her home to live with Imal and stay with friends, seeking safety from the suffocating oppression she could no longer endure. She repeatedly sought police protection, desperate for intervention, but her pleas went unanswered. On September 21, 2005, Ghazala and Imal quietly married at the registry office in Middle Fart, claiming their right to live as they chose, however briefly. For a moment, it seemed as if the couple could escape the shadow of her family's control. But the reprieve was short-lived. 2 days later, on September 23rd, the threat that had loomed over Ghazala her entire life became terrifyingly real. Lured to Slagos railway station under the pretense of reconciliation, the couple walked into a meticulously planned trap. The ambush was orchestrated by her father, Ghulam Abbas, and 9 relatives and associates, who coordinated their movements with precision through constant mobile communication. As Ghazala and Imal approached, Akhtar Abbas stepped forward and opened fire. Ghazala was killed instantly, collapsing in the station square in full view of horrified bystanders. Imal was struck twice in the abdomen, fighting for his life, but survived after emergency surgery. A bystander narrowly avoided being hit by stray bullets, a random brush with death underscoring the chaotic brutality of the attack. Investigations revealed the calculated and chilling nature of the murder. Ghulam Abbas, a 57-year-old taxi driver who had lived in Denmark since 1970, had ordered the killing to restore what he saw as the family's lost honor. Other family members and friends, including uncles Waliat Khan and Agar Ali, Aunt Pervin Khan, and associates Ghulam Ahmed, Ansurik Iqbal, and Nawed Sharif, played active roles in tracking the couple, coordinating their movements, and executing the deadly trap. Phone records detailed hundreds of calls in the days leading up to the attack, painting a portrait of careful planning, driven by patriarchal obsession and rigid adherence to a code of honor that sanctioned violence as punishment. The legal aftermath was equally historic. On June 27, 2006, 2006, Denmark's Eastern High Court convicted all 9 participants of murder and attempted murder. Sentences ranged from 8 years to life imprisonment, with several non-Danish citizens permanently deported. Ghulam Abbas received a life sentence, while Akhtar Abbas was sentenced to 16 years. The court emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, setting a precedent in Western Europe for how honor killings would be prosecuted in the future. Ghazala Khan's death remains one of Europe's most notorious honor-based revenge murders, a tragic reminder of how patriarchal control and rigid cultural codes can escalate into deadly violence. On an otherwise ordinary winter afternoon in January 1919, Boston's North End was abruptly transformed by one of the strangest and most tragic industrial disasters in American history, forever remembered as the Boston Molasses Flood. At the center of the catastrophe stood a massive steel storage tank owned by the Purity Distilling Company, a towering structure that had been leaking for months and groaning under pressure every time it was filled. On January 15th, without warning, the weakened tank finally gave way with a deafening crack that echoed through the neighborhood as if the city itself had split open. More than 2 million gallons of warm molasses burst out in a violent surge, forming a dark, rolling wave that witnesses described as a moving wall of syrup taller than a 2-story home, and rushing with a speed no one imagined molasses could reach. The surge tore through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour, fast enough to flatten buildings, rip apart supports, and trap anyone unlucky enough to be in its path before they could even react. People were swept off their feet, horses and carts were overturned, and the sticky flood poured into homes, storefronts, and alleyways with a force as relentless as any natural disaster. As the molasses spread, the cold January air caused it to thicken rapidly into a heavy, suffocating mass that made rescue efforts painfully slow. Firefighters, police officers, sailors from a nearby ship, and volunteers from around the city rushed to help, wading through the sticky mire and pulling out survivors with great difficulty. The thickening syrup clung to everything and made every movement exhausting, and many rescuers later said it felt like trying to walk through cement that refused to let go. By the time the immediate danger had passed, 21 people had lost their lives, and around 150 had been injured, while countless horses and other animals perished in the mess. Cleanup efforts stretched on for weeks as workers used saltwater pumps, shovels, and hoses, blasting seawater to break apart and wash away the hardened molasses, which coated streets, buildings, and debris in a stubborn, sugary layer. Even after the visible mess was removed, the scent lingered for months, and some longtime residents later claimed that on hot summer days the neighborhood still carried a faint, sugary sweetness that reminded them of the terrible event. In the months that followed, investigators uncovered a troubling story of negligence. The tank had been constructed with low-grade steel that was too thin to withstand the pressure of the liquid it held, and it had never been properly inspected or tested before being put into use. At one point, it had leaked so badly that the company chose to paint it a dark color to make the escaping molasses less noticeable rather than fix the problem. The disaster led to a major class action lawsuit that placed responsibility on the company for its failure to maintain safe equipment, and the outcome helped shape future standards for construction, engineering, and safety regulations throughout the United States. Today, the Boston Molasses Flood stands as both a bizarre historical curiosity and a sobering lesson in the real-world cost of cutting corners. It reminds us that even something as seemingly harmless as a storage tank of sweet syrup can become deadly when oversight is ignored, and that behind every odd story in history are real lives changed forever.